Yo, 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 what is going on, COD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today I got a great one for you. We are going to talk about the tips, giving you a guide essentially on how to go about reviving dead kingdoms or low activity kingdoms. And I'm going to give you a roadmap from top down that talks about the internal ways, which are ways within your home kingdom, and external ways outside of your home kingdom that you can get this done. Let me also preface that it is two things here. One, it is very important to understand that when you are aiming to revive a dead kingdom, it will take a lot of work. You need to have a almost uncanny level of dedication, commitment, resolve, and probably just activeness, so to speak, even though I probably should have said activity. Because again, it will be something that you will probably find or face multiple roadblocks. The second part here is that I am not saying that 178, which is the kingdom that we're just using as an example, is dead or deadish by any means. The reason I went here is because 178 currently is the oldest kingdom in Season 1, and before they did some type of mystery shadow update to the Lightbearer Augerstone achievement, which is supposed to unveil or defog the entire kingdom. That chapter now only defogs Atherin. And so, unfortunate, I didn't actually know that had happened, even though when I had made my accounts to go here, I sometimes would notice that, oh cool, I can go ahead and just view Zone 3 immediately. It was either that or maybe it was in the Merged Kingdoms that I'm thinking about now. But regardless, I digress. This is where we're at. We're just going to kind of be here as an example, right? Kind of not an exhibit, just to be clear. So let's get into point number one. There are two differences when it comes to internal and external kingdoms, or internal and external focuses within and outside of kingdoms. We're going to focus on the internal ones first, then we'll get to external. So the number one we should say on how you can go about reviving a dead kingdom is you need to identify, pitch, and place home kingdom players. This is broken up into three parts because it really is important to understand that there's three phases of this for point one. When it comes to the identify portion, you need to be able to identify players within your home kingdom. And this could be anyone from players who are messaging and DMing other players that are maybe saying, hey, I'd love to play in a more active alliance, or maybe they're DMing you, maybe they're DMing certain players, and the players that are receiving those messages are noticing that the players that they're speaking to are maybe in lower ranked alliances. Those could be ways to identify. Maybe players are posting in Tamara's chat or World Chat, as an example. Maybe you have some alliance members that are talking about it in alliance chat for some players that they've spoken to. Maybe they're interested in trying to find a more active alliance. And this doesn't always necessarily mean that the alliance has to be stronger. Doesn't mean that the players who are there always have to keep ladder climbing and working their way up. Sometimes you could have a number 6 alliance, or a number 9 alliance, or a number 5 or 4 alliance that are active and healthy, even if they're not the strongest, right? So that's a really important distinction to understand when you are going about and speaking to players, or like we get to number 2, which is pitching, or part 2 here. So 1B, we'll say, on the pitch portion, is being able to speak to players in a way where you are setting appropriate expectations with them. You're taking time to write something up. It doesn't necessarily have to be a mail. It can be a direct message in-game as well, right? A chat, if you will. But you're taking time to write something up nice that is explaining to them, or you're just someone who is kind of, a good people person. Maybe you talk to a lot of players and you have a good understanding about what to ask for, how to kind of gauge what they're looking for, and then be able to kind of deliver what you, I don't know if I want to say can offer, but what is available to them, right, with this option or another option. And then really at that point, just doing a little bit of bonding, right, building some rapport, and then going ahead and trying to convert. Then we get to the placing. The placing is important, like we talked about, and we did mention it briefly. But just do not always focus on trying to place players in the strongest alliances. Now, this is, again, I'm going to put an asterisk here, because the asterisk is also dependent on how your home kingdom is built. If your home kingdom is built with a mega alliance structure where you just have one alliance that funnels in all the top players, okay, well, I mean that's a little different. It might be harder to then place players. And this is generally speaking, and I'm just going to say, like, if you have an unbalanced kingdom where you have wide power differentials between the top alliance and the rest, it may be difficult to sell to players on, oh, hey, we'd love to put you in the number 2 or the number 3 or the number 4 alliance, compared to if you have an alliance or if you have a kingdom that has balanced or close to balanced alliance powers between, let's say, 1 and 6. It's a lot easier of a sell to a player to say, oh, hey, we'd love to place you in alliance number 6 because we're trying to build the power from the bottom up, as an example. And let's say if that player joins number 6, now that number 6 alliance becomes a number 5 alliance, right? But all the alliances are within 100 or 200 mil power of each other, right? Or something like that, or a couple hundred mil. It's a lot easier of a sell. And I'm giving you just 2 extreme examples, right? You could still find middle ground for a situation like that for a player. However, maybe players are okay in a kind of mega alliance structured kingdom or a kind of very wide gapped imbalanced kingdom where they're okay with going to a number 2 or number 3 alliance, right? A lot of it just depends on how well you can somewhat sell, but speak to the player on what the kingdom offers. Then we get to number 2, which is merging opportunities. So merging opportunities is really important because you need to be able to identify, once again, you'll probably hear me use this word often, potential alliances that are good to merge with when it comes to trying to revive. Because you could have some alliances that are within your top 20, maybe within your top 30, that could still be active when they have some players, or maybe they're in your top 15, your top 10, where they have even more activity. But the important thing is you don't want, and I'll tell you this is the biggest mistake that I see kingdoms make, is where they will merge alliances such as 1 and 2, or they'll merge 2 and 3, or 3 and 4, and they'll do this somewhat kind of early to mid age wise into a kingdom, right? So they'll do this in the first few weeks, or they'll do this in the first month, or the first 2 months, something like that, right? Where you really haven't had an opportunity for the kingdom to somewhat stabilize and just kind of see where the dust may settle. And it is one of the biggest mistakes, because not only do you lose out on, even though you could make the argument shells really aren't even that big of a thing because of obviously the resets, but you lose out on, even though you could argue the shells, you lose out on the shell familiarity. And this is kind of a different dimension to what you would normally consider as, like, for example, if you take a game like Rock and you have a shell that you're able to develop and then go in and play in KVKs where you can keep developing the technology, and that technology will carry over. In CoD, that doesn't happen, right? So the alliances will reset. You're going to have to rebuild the tech up. However, the one thing that will and can carry over is the player familiarity with that alliance, where if they see that alliance's name being used again, those players are more likely, regardless if they 100% convert or not, they're more likely to associate their familiarity with that alliance's name and tag, and can be more likely to join, right, compared to going somewhere else. So just something to point out. And I say that because you just do not want to get into a situation where you're just kind of all merge happy and you see all these things that are happening, because that's also a way. You also have to understand that there's ramifications to doing merges if you have more activity than what one of the shells can hold, because you will lose out on players, and that is something that can factor into player drop-off as well, where if you have, let's say, 150 people, but your shell can only hold 100, and you say, okay, well, we're just going to have this other alliance now become kind of the B team or the staging alliance where those 50 are going to go, there's a good chance those people might leave and go join other alliances that they can get spots in, right? Some of those players just might not feel good about the situation and might say, okay, well, man, this is kind of rough that they did us like this. Maybe I'll look to migrate out. Or, you know what, maybe I'm just not going to play my account that much anymore because, why am I in this situation when we had good activity before, but now I'm out in the cold just because maybe I'm not, I'm not in that top 100 strongest players. So just something to keep in mind. However, like we said, being able to identify alliances that even if they have 5, 10, 15 active players, right, those are things you can do with merges. Even though they're really more smaller merges, you might have to do a couple of those to kind of build up an alliance. Those are things you can do, like we were talking about, with the top 20, top 30, even maybe sometimes top 40 alliances. You'll be able to find some activity there. Then, we get to our next one. Let me try not to die here. Which is messaging alliances players. Totally dying. Let me get some water. Messaging alliances players. Oh my god. I swear I got some good sleep. Whew, that was intense. Messaging alliances players. This is something that probably takes the most amount of work because you need to be able to literally look around the entire map and look at players that may not be in alliances, but could still have decent city hall level or power to where you could consider them to be active. Right? This is almost the same thing as what you would consider to be players, and actually we'll get to that in a moment because that really is kind of a little pro tip that I'll give you at the end. But going around the map, basically having people kind of go zone by zone, and you're just, you're kind of book methoding it, right? You're going left, right, top, down, and you're just looking around, and you're looking for anyone that is allianceless, and then you would have kind of a nice template message that you would already have drafted that you're just copy pasting to these people, just do, back to back to back, and then you keep track of those people on a spreadsheet. You see who doesn't respond, who did respond, and that can also be a way where you can, furthermore, additionally identify players that are inactive, right? If they don't message you back, and then maybe it's, okay, well, hey, these players haven't done us, we can go ahead and loot them as an example, right? Because you know that they're inactive, right? So you feel a little better about it than maybe potentially looting someone who is active. So, but that's I would say was that number 3, 1, 2, 3, yep. And then number 4 is DMing players something meaningful. We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but this is really important to me, so I wanted to make it a solo point. Being able to draft, if it's an initial message you're going to send to people, so you have different templates that you'll have. Like I would probably write something different to someone who is allianceless compared to someone who isn't an alliance but is looking for another home. Same thing as if I was messaging a player in a lower ranked alliance that maybe had 5, 10, 15 players, I would probably DM them something different as well. You have to kind of cater your words to specific types of players based on their situation that is more relevant to them, something that's going to connect with them a lot more. So it's good to have those. In addition, it's also good to be able to continue dialogue or have dialogue with players beyond just an initial message, right? What if they have questions? What if they are talking or speaking about maybe their situation, right? Being able to kind of connect and relate to those things is really important if you want to be able to kind of convert, if we want to say a sale, right? Or again, or an activity point. Then we get to number 5. Let's talk about kind of external factors, right? And we'll come back to some internal stuff too. But let's talk about migration. Migration is probably one of the best ways, and hopefully maybe some caps will be removed at some point or raised for certain kingdoms, but migration is something where that allows for you to get quality activity coming in and hopefully a lot of players as well. And so my advice when it comes to migration is very similar to the whole identify, pitch, and place, except in this situation you want to research, identify, pitch, and place. Meaning that if migration's opening, you should have accounts or characters in each of the kingdoms within your group. You should be researching those alliances, those players, maybe reaching out to some leads and just saying, hey, not sure if you guys are interested in migrating out or not. If you are, we do have some space in our alliances. We have good activity, things like that, right? Things that you feel you can sell. And I'll probably do a separate video on that when it comes just to kind of migrating or being able to kind of find your new home, where I'll do a deep dive on that because I do have some words on that. Because I'm just not a fan of the fact that there is no home kingdom, because I think that really impacts and makes it a little more difficult. On top of the fact that alliances do hard resets, my view on this simply is that we should have home kingdom. You still should have a home kingdom, even if you're only going back for a week or two, right? I don't think it should be something like Rock where you're going back for a month or 2 months or however long it may be now. But I think going back for 1 to 2 weeks, I kind of like that around 2 week window. But 1 to 2 weeks I think would be great. For where you just kind of get a little mini break long enough to basically heal up all your troops and just kind of reorganize and reassess and kind of reallocate yourselves. And then you go right back into a merged kingdom. Similar thing, with alliances and the player resets. I can understand if you want to reset tech. I can somewhat get that. However, what I can't really wrap my head around is that you're completely resetting players within season to season. And I'll do a deeper dive on this too as well, but my view really on it is that alliances should keep all the players they have, even if it, like, let's say you have 150 players, but you go into season 2 You do get the double member cap increase, so it does go from 40 to 80 on new alliances that are restarted. But it should be where you then have 150 over 80, right? So you keep, as long as the players are in the alliance before Season 1 resets, you get to keep all those players in the alliance going into the next season. That, at minimum, is what I really believe should be happening. Even if you're still going to reset all the other tech, which again, I can understand why they would want to do that with the way that the game, the game is going. But I just do not agree with that. You should do hard resets for the players. I think that's extremely negatively impactful. Okay, then let's get to the next one here, which is going to be number 6, right? And we're kind of going to go back a little bit to the internal part of the kingdom, which is self-assessing. It is important, and you can do this at any stage. It's just easier to do this, I feel, in Season 1 because you still are able to have your home kingdom. You can still see alliances and leads and officers, so it's easier to kind of do what I'm going to talk about in a moment, which is self-assessing and kind of doing feedback rounds. One of the things that can also impact kingdoms losing activity and becoming dead or deadish is the way that those kingdoms operate. When you do not understand your market or you do not understand your player base, and this doesn't mean that you need to cater. There's a big difference between understanding and then catering to a market or a player base or a community. It's important that you understand your community. Understanding them essentially just means that you are asking them for their feedback. What are things that they like that's happening? What are things that they're kind of cautious or maybe don't like that's happening? What are things they'd like to know but they don't know? Doing these types of things, whether you're self-assessing internally within your alliance or you're doing multiple alliances, right, i.e. the kingdom, and then you're doing it that way. One of the easiest ways to do this is just do anonymous feedback rounds, right? We do this in kingdoms and projects that I run or manage, if you will, and we'll just do like an anonymous Google form as an example, something super simple. We'll ask a couple questions, and we'll post this in Alliance. We'll do this in Alliance Mail. We'll post this on the Kingdom Discord. We'll post this in World Chat as an example, and we'll just get as many people as we can to give us feedback. And then when we do a town hall, right, where we have everyone from the kingdom or as many people that want to show up as possible, right, we'll answer these questions, we'll record it, and then we'll upload it. So that way, even if people couldn't make the meeting or the town hall, right, they could still go back and listen to it, and we'll try and timestamp out the questions that were asked. So that's something that I think is really important because you don't know what you don't know, right? It's such a huge thing that because you have to understand, not every player is going to speak up. Not every player is going to come out and tell you what they like that's happening or what they don't like that's happening. So being able to do feedback rounds, especially if they're anonymous, is a good chance to generate a lot more players to actually come out and speak, even though it may not be everyone and probably will never be everyone within a kingdom. But then you also have to be able to self-assess. Like, you have to be self-aware enough to know, okay, what's going on in my surroundings? Are what we're doing having good impacts, maybe not the best impacts? You have to be able to have some level of self-awareness. And that can be difficult, right? If you're prideful, if you just think that you're the bee's knees and everything you do is great, there has to be some level of humbleness and humility in order to appropriately self-assess and be self-aware of one's doings. Then we get to number 7, excuse me, I think we're at right now, which is soft skills. So some of you might be like, well, soft skills, right? What are those? How does that impact me being able to revive my dead kingdom? Well, let's be honest. If you're just a D and an A-hole, do you think people are going to enjoy playing in your kingdom, i.e., or I should say, and or your alliances? I mean, probably not. There's just less likely of a chance of that. So the way that you carry yourself and you present yourself and you speak to people, right? If you show them respect or you don't show them respect, right? Or you talk to them nicely, or you don't talk to them nicely, or you're just incredibly blunt and curt with them, or maybe you're giving them a little more TLC. Those are things that are going to impact the way that players respond and think to themselves, okay, well, I really like where I'm playing right now, man. These guys are great. Or, you know what, man, these guys are just, like, not really well put together, not organized. They're kind of mean. I just don't really want to be here. So when migration comes up, you know what, I'm going to dip when that happens. That is something that is probably one of the most non-talked about parts that factors into a kingdom in totality, but definitely is a big factor when it comes to, will you be able to revive a dead kingdom? Because what happens if one of the biggest factors in your kingdom for why it ended up becoming low activity or dead is because of the way that you spoke to people. It's because of the people who were in leadership, kingdom leadership, or the top alliances, or however your kingdom governance is, were just mean and rude to people, right? And that was one of the reasons why people migrated out, or people stopped playing, or people revolted, or went to another alliance. Those are things you have to consider. And so, because again, we're all people, we're all humans, and it doesn't mean that you have the right to speak to someone or to speak to people or alliances however you want to. Now, bear in mind, you can do what you want, but those actions will potentially have consequences, right? Or they'll have repercussions. And so, right, every action kind of has a reaction. So, if you do this, you might get this. If you do this, maybe this is better on the response. So, soft skills to me are really important. Soft skills are basically just the way that we talk to people, right? Being able to, how we speak to people, the tone that we use, our word choices, how we're able to be patient with people. That is something that is such, to me, I think, one of the biggest factors that we don't, as I mentioned before, we just don't talk about enough and isn't really focused on enough in kingdom builders. And maybe you could just generally say gaming, if you're trying to do like something like kingdom builders, right, where you're talking about management style stuff or games that have big guilds. These traits and skills are really important. So then we get to number 8. And number 8 is, generally speaking, how you have decided to kind of manage and run your kingdom, which is, are we doing a mega alliance? Are we trying to go for balance? Are we just trying to have a bunch of active alliances, even if there is some power disparity? Those are things that will also factor into if your kingdom is more likely to lose activity or have low activity or become dead versus not. And the fact is that if you look at historical data and trends, and I'll give this to you in the easiest way to really digest. If you're running a kingdom that's running a mega alliance system, where you're funneling all your power upwards essentially into one alliance predominantly, if not maybe two, but this is usually done with one, and you're funneling everyone upwards, you're going to have wide power disparity, and you're also going to set the precedent for how players in your kingdom feel and how they think, which is, oh, well, I just need to try and work my way up, like a pyramid, right, to the number one alliance. And that can lead to more negative net impacting results than actual positive ones. And that's because nobody wants to feel like they're playing in an inactive alliance. That's just a general fact. Nobody really wants that, right? And we're talking about the people who are playing daily, they're logging in daily. Just nobody wants to play in an inactive, deadish alliance. And so those are things that can factor and really more heavily impact that area when it comes to player drop-off. Then you get to the other side, which is, okay, well, and we're just going to look at the extreme ends. Let's say that you have a lot of active alliances, and those alliances are all pretty balanced, right? We briefly spoke about this before, but you are more likely to keep players in your kingdom if you focus on things like trying to balance out alliance power, having as many alliances that can be active and healthy as possible, because then players are less likely to move and or want to try and move up. And then 2, it's a lot easier to place players in alliances when there's not really wide power gaps, because it won't matter necessarily, right? I mean, maybe some reasons you'll get for player movement would be, oh, well, when they do raid times, it's just there's not a lot of people on, maybe because it's more NA based. Maybe then it's, oh, hey, can I go join a more EU based alliance, or an alliance that's maybe more active around this time so I can participate in AVA events. Things like that are more likely the reasons on why you would get players who would like to move alliances, but it's less likely it will happen in mass compared to if you're running something like a mega alliance structure, and also less likely that your kingdom will have an extreme level of player drop-off or major level of player drop-off, and therefore you will be, I don't want to say more susceptible, but you will see that your kingdom will retain a lot more activity and therefore be able to sustain for longer periods of time that activity, where you have a higher chance of not falling into the pitfalls of a dead kingdom, right? Or a kingdom that eventually becomes very low activity. So those are going to be my 8 points that we talk about today. I didn't actually realize that I was going for almost 25 minutes. But I do hope that this helps. And again, I didn't really cover every single thing, but I covered a lot of the highlight points for not only what I've experienced running multiple projects, but also just researching a lot of kingdoms and speaking to players in a lot of kingdoms across 3 different games. This is one of the things I absolutely love doing, which is a lot of research. I like educating myself. I like looking at trends, why things happen the way they do, and also understanding player psychology, which I think is very important for why players act the way they do, what really attracts them to certain things, what dissuades them from certain things, and almost anything in between. So that is going to do it for me. I now will want to pass the question off to you. So let me know if you have played in a kingdom, whether it's here in Call of Dragons or another, and that kingdom, let's say you started off playing in that kingdom from the beginning, and that kingdom eventually became dead or very low activity. I would love to know from you, were you paying attention? And if you were, how did the kingdom go from, if it had good activity, to it being dead? What caused it? What were the factors? Let me know in the comments down below. That's going to do it for me. As always, until next time, I will catch you later.